blasting, billowing, bursting forth with the power of 10 billion butterfly sneezes.
This is Wine, Money, and Song. And if you're interested in wine and you want to learn about the best values in wine, please subscribe. As of this filming today, this is the weekend of Mother's Day. So I'm going to title this story, A Mother's Day Tale. And when I worked in the Bronx, the gentleman who I worked for was a big, tough Italian guy. And I became part of his family eventually, where I would go over every Sunday and have pasta and gravy, he called it. He didn't call it sauce. He called it gravy, which I found very curious for Italian. I go, maybe they call it gravy. We'd have meatballs. We'd have all the other meat, sausages, and all the rolled up Pujol and all that stuff. And it was great because I never had that as a kid. I never had the big Sunday dinners and everything like that. And so I was working in the store with him, and it was the day before Mother's Day. And he said to me, "What are you getting your mother for Mother's Day?" And I says, "I'll get her flowers, give her a card." And he said, "It's an important day." He says, you got to treat your mother well. And I don't know if he knew at the time, but, me and my mother had a really tough life. Besides having me and my two brothers, she came from an alcoholic family. And my granddad was quite abusive, and my mother left the house at 17 to get married, and of course she married an alcoholic, and my mother became an alcoholic. So, I had a lot of things to work through with my mother, and I finally did, I think, but it took me till I was like 40 to understand what my mother went through. But what Phil, my boss, said to me, you got to take care of your mother. You got to, that's your mother. You only have one mother, and they do the best they can. He says, you better be good to your mother tomorrow. So I said, okay. So Mother's Day comes. I give my mother, Happy Mother's Day. And it was very not emotional. It was like an obligation to me. So I did it. And it wasn't done with love. It was done out of some requirement I had. So half an hour after that, I'm sitting on my stoop in Flushing, Queens, and I see this car come rolling up. And I said, "Is that Phil's car?" I go, he stopped the car. He gets out. He has a big bouquet of flowers and a box of candy. And I go, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he said to me, "I got something for your mother." And I looked at him. I go, "What?" He says, "Yeah." He rings the doorbell. My mother comes from the door, and he introduced himself. "I'm Phil Galderisi, and your son works for me, and I want to thank you for raising such a great kid. I can tell you're a great mom just by your son." And my mother just stood there, and she didn't know what to say. So he hands her the bouquet, hands her the box of chocolate, comes in for like 10 minutes, talks to my mother, makes my mother feel like $1 million. And he's just, and he was very good at that. He knows how to build you up, how to charm you, but it was genuine. He really cared. And I wasn't used to that. I didn't know how to handle that. So he stayed for 10 minutes. He walked, and he made my mother feel like $1 million, which I never did. And I didn't know how to do, and I had to work on that a good 20 years of my life after I was a young adult. It took me a long time that I could sort of build my personality up to that and open my heart up and to show love like that. And when he walked out, I stopped him. I go, "Why'd you do that? Why did you come and do that?" And he says, "Because you have to understand, that's your mother. And it's the only mother you're going to have. And when she's gone, I don't want you to regret things. I want you to have a clear conscience, and what's ever happened in your life and you have against your mother, you have to forgive her. And I said to him, you don't know half of what I've been through with my mom. He says, I don't care. You got to forgive her. I go, what do you mean forgive her? He goes, forgive her everything, no matter what it was. She's doing the best she can, and obviously she hasn't had an easy time. And from that moment on, I looked at my mother in a different way. And I realized that she's been through a tough life, and she's had a lot of pain in her life. And she spent most of her life trying to fill in the empty spaces she had, and from the abuse her father gave her and her husband when she got married. And her life was filled with hurt, emptiness, and shame. And I guess I shared that to a great degree. And it prevented me from being a young adult, and my relationships with friends, with women, it really held me back, that I was afraid because of what I felt. And once I got on the subject of understanding my mother, I could understand other people, and I could risk my feelings. And when my mom passed away, I got the phone call. I was on my back deck in Westchester County, and she was in hospice, and I knew she was going to die soon. And I got the call, and my wife came out, and she saw my face, and I had a few tears coming down my face. And my wife knew, and she says, I'm sorry. I says, I'm not crying for the reasons you think I'm crying. Most people cry after someone passes away because you lose them. And you're not going to have the opportunity to have them in your life anymore. That's not why I'm crying. I'm crying because my mother's life was filled with pain. And she had a really tough life. And it was full of shame. And she shared that with us. And it took me a long time before I forgave her, but I did. But I feel bad. And every Mother's Day, I think about that day when Phil came to my house and dropped off that gift. But what it did something to me and made me look at my mother and all the people who loved me in my life and who I tried to love in my life. It changed the way I looked at things, and from that day on, I started to build myself up and be much more receptive. So I thank him for doing that. Phil passed away several years ago, but he had a great impact upon me, and he was one of the first people who was in my corner and who looked at me. And my last conversation with him before he died, we talked for an hour, and he was very sick. And what I said to him, the last thing I said to him is, I love you. And he said back to me, I love you too. So we left nothing unsaid. And when you have relationships and someone, make sure you tell them while they're alive, and don't leave anything unsaid. So happy Mother's Day to everyone, and everyone treat their mother well no matter what.